Welcome back. I want to continue with ancient Sumer in this lecture. We're going to talk specifically about religion. The religious rites practiced by the Sumerians include propitiation. Now, that's a big fancy word meaning sacrifice. The idea here, of course, is to sacrifice to the gods, to appease them, to propitiate them so that we'll have rainfall, or we'll have victory in war, or the scourge of disease will leave us. I think we could say this is a fairly pessimistic or fatalistic people. You can see that in their culture and their religion. It's probably important to note that religion does not play an ethical function in ancient Sumeria. It does not teach people how to live, which is quite different, of course, from modern monotheistic religions. It's also worth noting, speaking of religion, that Sumer is a region of many religious traditions. In this way, I suppose it's similar to India, also a region where many religions are born. The myths that emerged from Sumer and from other nearby areas, Canaan, for instance, where the Hebrews settled, we see the similarities here that are striking, specifically the Sumerian ziggurats, the temples that are built skyward. We see, of course, in Genesis, the Tower of Babel, and this was based upon the ancient ziggurats that you find in Sumer. Babel, of course, pertains to Babylon, one of the ancient cities near the Euphrates. The Sumerian word Eden, we find that in Genesis as well, in the Garden of Eden. The Sumerian Eden refers to the marshlands in southern Iraq. So I suppose we could locate the Garden of Eden in these marshlands in southern Iraq or southern Mesopotamia. I'm using Iraq, the modern term for this place. We have reed huts, we have man-made islands, freshwater lagoons, and then just further south you have the immense saltwater of the Persian Gulf. Let's stay with religion. I think it's important to note that the ziggurat, the temple, is central in Sumerian society. God is among his people. Families run these temples for generations. And it's probably important to note that various religious traditions come and go, but in spite of the differences, religious traditions do remain in Mesopotamia. There's a sense of continuity here. It's important to understand, or at least to remember, you probably already know this, but Abraham, that we see in Genesis, is of course from a Sumerian city, in southern Mesopotamia. Abraham is obviously important because we track monotheistic religions back to him. You remember that Abraham migrates from Mesopotamia to Palestine. And he is the founding father, so to speak, of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three great monotheistic religions. Let me continue with religion a bit more. One of the metaphors that, and one of the terms of abuse that are quite common to historians is the whore of Babylon. This, of course, is a metaphor for the ancient Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire before Constantine, before the establishment of Christianity as the faith of the empire. This is a term of abuse that certain sects of Christians use against other Christians or other persecutors, in this case Rome. Later, the Protestants will refer to the Catholic Church and the Pope as the whore of Babylon. Again, Babylon being distinctly different, Sumerian location as opposed to the Hebrews in Canaan. And with religion, of course, we have the Great Flood, which we'll talk about in more detail later. I mentioned earlier that Utnapishtim is the Sumerian counterpart for Noah in Genesis, and we'll compare Genesis, the flood story in Genesis, to the Epic of Gilgamesh. A couple things about law here. A Sumerian society dominated by the priest, who operate the ziggurats, by kings and the nobility. Law is not abstract. The laws are carved into the cuneiform tablets, and they're displayed so that people can see them in public places. Many of you probably have heard of Hammurabi's Code. This is from the Babylonian Empire, geographically in the same area as ancient Sumer. Let's talk about literature for just a moment. Again, I've mentioned Gilgamesh a few times, and this has been dated at about 2500 BCE. It's a great epic. Enkidu is one of the central characters here, characterized as the natural man who runs with the animals until he is seduced by a woman and now becomes civilized. You see the transition from being nomadic to becoming sedentary. The very name Enkidu is translated as, quote, as the worm fastened on him. So there is here the image of death as you transition from the natural nomadic life to a settled city life. Enkidu, of course, seeks immortality. In the myth, he is told that he can dive to the bottom of the sea, and there is a plant there growing on the seabed that if he will retrieve it, it will give him immortality. Of course, he's tricked. When he brings the plant back to the surface, a serpent steals the plant, thus robbing Enkidu of immortality. Let's shift gears just a bit here, talk about some social tensions in this ancient Sumerian society. The first one is, how do you feed all these people? You have an ever-growing urban population. How do you feed them? This is an ongoing problem in human history. We don't really think about it in our society because we are surrounded by food. You can't throw a rock without hitting a restaurant in the West. This has not always been the case, though. So the constant tension between the elite and the masses of the people, and how are they to be fed. And again, social tensions revolve around just how fertile is the earth and just how voracious are the people who are dependent upon the earth for their survival. You have social stratifications in ancient Sumer. Again, you have the temple priest, you have the warrior kings, you have agricultural lands outside the city walls. This has to be managed. Political history for ancient Sumer. I mentioned earlier that it's an area that is vulnerable to invasion. Over the centuries, we see Persians and Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, the British Empire, the United States Army have all intruded into this area. The Arab conquest is the most lasting of these invasions. And just a bit of political history here in closing. We talked about invasion. The earliest record of invaders that we have are the Akkadians, round figures about 2350 before the Common Era, invading from the north, from what today we might think of as southern Turkey. Sargon, of course, was the leader of the Akkadians. It's interesting that he is, according to the mythology, he's found floating in a reed basket by one of the king's assistants. This, of course, is parallel with the Moses story in Genesis, or not in Genesis, but in the following books. You remember Moses is found as an infant in a reed basket in the Nile and is rescued by one of the Pharaoh's daughters, I believe. I think it's important also to understand that these riverine societies are utterly dependent upon the water. But the water, of course, can bring catastrophe as well. So the water is a source of both life and death. And finally here, talking about Sargon and the Akkadians, they were absorbed by Sumerian society. This is something we see throughout history as well. The closest analogy I can think of off the top of my head, of course, are the Mongols. The Mongols overran much of southern Asia in the 14th century, and they were absorbed. These larger, more sophisticated civilizations simply absorbed the invader, so that the Mongols in China became Chinese. The Mongols in India became Indian. The Mongols in Persia became Persian, and adopted the ways and the religious habits of these much larger, much more complex civilizations. It's very similar here with the Akkadians in ancient Sumeria. I'll finish up just a couple things here. Baghdad, of course, was founded in the 8th century by Arab Muslim conquerors. I mentioned the Mongols. The Mongols overran Baghdad in 1258. The United States conquered Baghdad in 2003, as many of you may recall. So, it's interesting, in Gulf War II, the United States Army, the epitome of the West, returns to Mesopotamia, where the West begins. So I'm going to stop there with ancient Sumer. In our next lecture, we'll tackle the ancient Hebrews. And we'll break that up into a few lectures as well, because there's a lot of material. When you think of the ancient Hebrews, of course, you have to consider the immense influence that they've had over world history, and especially Western civilization, with the creation of the Bible and of a monotheistic religion. So we'll stop there for now. Thank you.